We've got some extra special additions to today's service, but I do want to share some thoughts on table manners, since we are at table. And table manners were a huge part of growing up Bucey. In the Bucey house, there were three main table manner tenets. And since there were also three Bucey kids, each of us naturally became the go-to expert for breaking one of them. My brother Christian was particularly gifted at breaking rule number 1, thou shalt not chew with mouth open. I was especially equipped to break rule number 2, thou shalt not sing at table. La 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 la. But my sister Jordan won the prize every time by agilely eviscerating rule number 3, thou shalt eat at least 3 bites of vegetables. In her most gloriously shining revolutionary moment, my sister held 3 bites of soggy peas in her mouth, refusing to swallow for nearly 45 record-shattering minutes. Jordan Bucey, modern American hero. We Bucey kids might not have been the sharpest crayons in the box, but we followed our colorful convictions to the bitter, soggy end. Manners, particularly table manners, are something we know we should follow, even when we grow too lazy to do it. Each family table has its own particular set of rules, but every table's rule seems to spring from some primordial ooze of decency that undergirds their sometimes ridiculous rigidity. We all want to be good people. We all want to do the right thing, or at least we know we should want to be good and should want to do the right thing. And we've got folks like Miss Manners and Ann Landers and Abigail Van Buren and Emily Post to help us figure out the murkier details. But little did I know that someone like Emily Post, a woman whose legendary opinions I had always assumed were far too uppity and exclusive to affect a true heathen like myself, could stop me cold with the words of today's meditation quotation on your bulletin cover. You can go ahead and take a look if you haven't seen it. Now, full disclosure, there are lots of people in Brooklyn who know that I tear up often on the C train, but seldom do I tear up with the unexpected fervor that I did when I read these simple words, words that line up perfectly with this week's lectionary reading, the story of the loaves and fishes. Far more than just a miracle story, the loaves and fishes tale is an illustration of manners. And by manners, I mean exactly what Emily Post celebrates, and that is having a sensitive awareness of the feelings of others. Basically, the text starts out with a familiar scene. Jesus and the disciples are hanging out, teaching and learning, and as happens in these idyllic pastoral scenes, they are joined by hordes of hangers-on who want to join in on the gospel-getting fun. But as the day draws to a close, the disciples are ready to send all of these extras away, so that they, the supporting stars, and Jesus, the main attraction, may enjoy the rest of the evening at their own disciples-only banquet, far from the demanding kiddie table. And Jesus basically says, come on, guys, there's enough. And they open up their table, and surprise, surprise, there is. Now, I probably don't need to tell you that we practice a form of this miracle when we gather each first Sunday of the month for Agape and dole out our cheese and crackers and donut holes and marvel at the fact that it all stretches to serve all of us every time. We co-create a mini version of the loaves and fishes trick every time we meet for an Agape meal. But I also want to observe today that this simple act has astronomical implications that go beyond even the goodness we can immediately see. Anytime we set a table where the only true rule is that we promise to have a sensitive awareness of the feelings of others, miracles happen. And one of our other table-specific monthly events at Judson, which I've already mentioned, Bailout, is another example of agape. It's another example of saying, there's enough, promising to maintain sensitive awareness, and watching the sparks fly. At Bailout, the fact that we gather free donations, spend $50, and make a meal that sometimes serves over 250 people is just the beginning. It's what happens around the meal that really embodies the loaves and fishes ethic. By coming to the table, not only are bodies fed, but unexpected conversations lead to transformation that might not have seemed possible just moments before. Walls and borders are eroded, and connections are erected in their place. A few months ago, one of our Bailout regulars, I will call him Brad because that is far from his real name, Brad ended up sitting in the vestibule out front, recovering from a heroin trip. My partner, Matt, and I sat with him, chatting about not much, until Brad asked me, "So, are you one of those priests who's allowed to have a woman?" I paused for a second, not wanting to ruin the trust I had built with Brad over the past few years, and suddenly terrified that I might put myself and Matt in danger. Finally, I pointed to Matt and blurted out as fast as I could, "Actually, this is my partner." Brad stopped, and I actually watched him decide to be okay with that. It wasn't instantaneous. I actually witnessed his decision to accept it. And he said, "That's cool." And I decided that it was pretty cool too. I almost didn't make space for Brad at my table. But once I did, he made space for me and for Matt too. Thankfully, Brad made the table sharing go pretty smoothly that night, but there are many, many ways that we human creatures mess it up. And when we hoard the table and push others away and insist that our way to set and serve and administer portions is the only way, we end up with broken relationships that stretch from infighting among households to endless warring over land and bodies to violently guarded borders, all of which end up punishing the most vulnerable among us. Our agape meals and our Bailout meals are regular ritualizations of a theology of enough. These rituals assert that, just like the food, the love here is enough to go around, enough to change us in a true experience of metanoia that will leave us forever transformed, and enough to sustain that metanoia even after the initial jolt is over. And these ritualizations have astonishing implications for the world outside these walls. You're about to see one example as we welcome today's modern testimonial, which is a monologue from next week's Bailout event. This project, called "Can We Come to the Table?", is an example of agape writ large. The show is the brainchild of Alan Bounville, who has joined us today with one of his cast members, Courtney. And in 2011, Alan set off on a 6,000-mile walking trip, during which he hoofed it from Seattle down to Florida and up to Washington, D.C. over 21 months, pushing a little cart with 2 rainbow flags and a sign that said, "Full equality now." Alan wanted to see what kinds of conversations he could start if he simply offered himself and asked the question, "How can we come to the table?" Alan's project is most specifically about gender identity and expression, but it represents something much larger. It was and is an invitation for others to join the table. Not just those who agreed with his own thoughts, but anyone who wanted to talk for a while and let the conversation flow, creating the space for change. The results of this journey will be shown this coming Wednesday on this very floor as we gather around these same tables for another Bailout meal, and hear the varied voices of this country. Some of these voices will entertain us. Some will sadden us. Some will anger us. But all will set the table for better achieving a sensitive awareness for the feelings of others. And that's the potential packed into every first week of the month here at Judson. That's the potential packed into every moment we open our literal and proverbial tables, listen to the stories inside each of us, and agree to keep the table sharing going until we figure it all out. That's a theology of enough. The other rules are just window dressing. Here, we don't really mind if you chew with your mouth open, and we clearly love it when you sing at the table. And we all know that the only way to give peas a chance is to stay at the table and take a bite together. Remarkable things happen when you invite the conversation.